You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly sense tension, or when someone's presence immediately puts you at ease? That's not your imagination, you're detecting actual energy fields created by human consciousness. Here's what they don't teach in physics class. Your thoughts generate measurable electromagnetic frequencies that ripple outward, literally shaping the reality around you. When you think thoughts of love, gratitude, or peace, you're broadcasting coherent energy patterns that enhance life force itself. But thoughts of anger, fear, or resentment, they create chaotic frequencies that actually break down the fundamental fabric of creation. Quantum physicists have proven consciousness affects matter at the particle level, yet this knowledge remains buried in academic journals while schools teach you that thoughts are just random brain activity. Consider how differently you'd live if you understood that every complaint, every gossip session, every moment spent dwelling on problems creates destructive energy fields that sabotage your own life. The question is, who benefits from keeping you unaware of your creative power? When you start digging into the historical record, you discover something that fundamentally changes how you see the world. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented history sitting in libraries and archaeological records across the globe. For thousands of years, the most powerful civilizations on Earth have systematically restricted access to knowledge about how consciousness interacts with reality. Let me walk you through the evidence, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. In ancient Egypt, the priests guarded something called the Books of Coming Forth by Day, what we now call the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But here's what most people don't realize. These weren't burial instructions. They were detailed formulas for connecting with higher spiritual forces while still alive. The texts describe specific techniques for projecting consciousness beyond the physical body, communicating with non-physical entities, and manipulating what they called the K, the energy field that surrounds every living being. Sound familiar? It should, because we talked about these energy fields in our previous discussion. The Egyptians understood this science 3,000 years ago. But here's the crucial part. Only the pharaohs and high priests had access to these techniques. The general population was told simplified stories about gods and afterlife rewards, while the real knowledge remained locked away in temple sanctuaries. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dendera and Edfu shows elaborate chambers designed specifically for consciousness-altering practices, complete with acoustic properties that induce altered states of awareness. The same pattern emerges in ancient Greece with the Eleusinian mysteries. For over 1,000 years, these secret ceremonies took place just outside Athens. Participants, including famous philosophers like Plato and Cicero, underwent what they described as a complete transformation of consciousness. They spoke of experiencing symbolic death and rebirth, of gaining direct knowledge about the nature of reality itself. But here's the telling detail. Revealing what happened during these ceremonies was punishable by death. Not exile, not imprisonment, death. Why would spiritual knowledge require such extreme secrecy? The participants consistently reported that the experience gave them complete certainty about their ability to influence their destiny and connect with cosmic forces. In other words, they learned practical techniques for co-creating reality. The Hermetic tradition provides even more explicit evidence. The texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus contain detailed instructions for what we'd now call consciousness-based reality manipulation. But the alchemists and Hermetic practitioners deliberately wrote in symbolic language so dense that only initiates could decode the real meaning. They used symbols, metaphors, and coded references that required years of study to understand. Take the concept of transmuting lead into gold. Modern scholars now recognize this wasn't about physical metallurgy. It was about transforming base consciousness into enlightened awareness that could literally attract material abundance. The philosopher's stone wasn't a physical object. It was a state of consciousness that gave practitioners tremendous power over their circumstances. Why all the secrecy? The official explanation was always protection. They claimed that releasing this knowledge to unprepared minds could cause cosmic imbalance or personal destruction. But when you examine who held the power in these societies, a different picture emerges. In Egypt, the priest class controlled vast wealth and wielded enormous political influence. In Greece, the mystery school graduates became the philosophers, politicians, and cultural leaders who shaped entire civilizations. The Hermetic practitioners often served as advisors to royalty and accumulated significant personal wealth. Possessing this spiritual wisdom gave certain individuals massive advantages over the general population. They understood principles of consciousness and energy that allowed them to influence outcomes, attract resources, and navigate life with knowledge that others simply didn't have access to. This pattern repeats throughout history with remarkable consistency. The Gnostic traditions emphasized gnosis, direct inner knowledge of spiritual reality, but kept their most powerful practices within closed circles. Kabbalistic schools developed elaborate systems for understanding how consciousness interacts with the fabric of existence, but protected these teachings behind layers of symbolism and initiation requirements. Medieval alchemists, Renaissance mages, and various initiatory societies all followed the same model: powerful knowledge preserved through secret codes, passwords, and carefully guarded transmission from teacher to student. Some of the most sensitive information about these historical cover-ups is too confidential to share on YouTube, which is why we've created our free Insights Academy newsletter where we share exclusive hidden knowledge. Sign up now and receive a complimentary copy of The Kybalion for a limited time only. What becomes clear when you study this historical evidence is that the suppression wasn't random or accidental. It was systematic. Each generation of knowledge keepers made deliberate choices about who could access transformative spiritual technologies and who would remain in ignorance. And this pattern didn't end with ancient civilizations. It evolved and continues today in more subtle forms. Modern educational systems completely ignore consciousness research and spiritual laws, despite mounting scientific evidence for phenomena like remote viewing, psychokinesis, and consciousness-based healing. Universities teach materialist philosophy as absolute fact, while dismissing thousands of years of documented experience with non-physical reality. The same institutions that claim to value knowledge and human development systematically exclude the most empowering information humans have ever discovered. Students graduate with detailed knowledge about chemical reactions and historical dates, but zero understanding of how their consciousness creates their experience. When you step back and look at the complete historical record, you're looking at a massive puzzle where every piece points to the same conclusion. There has been a deliberate, multi-generational effort to keep the most powerful knowledge about human potential locked away from the majority of humanity. The question isn't whether this suppression happened. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is why it continues, and what becomes possible when you reclaim access to this forbidden knowledge about co-creating reality. Picture this. A child sits in a classroom, memorizing multiplication tables and state capitals, while just down the hall, researchers at major universities are publishing groundbreaking studies on consciousness, quantum field theory, and the measurable effects of intention on physical reality. That child will graduate never having heard of these discoveries. They'll learn about the periodic table of elements, but never about the energy fields that connect all matter. They'll study history's wars, but never the mystery schools that taught mental alchemy for thousands of years. This isn't an oversight, it's architectural. I spent years wondering why my education felt so incomplete. Why did I learn to dissect a frog, but never how to understand my own mind? Why memorize Shakespeare's sonnets, but never study the consciousness principles that Shakespeare himself explored in his work? The answer became clear when I started looking at what the current educational system actually produces. Compliant workers who seek external validation, follow instructions without question, and believe their survival depends entirely on someone else giving them permission to succeed. Think about the core message embedded in traditional schooling. Sit still, raise your hand. Wait for permission to speak. The teacher has the answers. Your job is to absorb and repeat. Don't trust your intuition. Trust the textbook. Don't explore your own interests during class time. Follow the predetermined curriculum. Don't collaborate too much. That's cheating. Your worth is determined by grades assigned by authority figures who may not even know your name. Now contrast this with what children aren't learning. They're not taught that their thoughts create measurable electromagnetic fields, even though this has been scientifically documented since the 1960 seconds. They don't learn breathing techniques that can shift their nervous system from stress to creativity in minutes. No one explains that. Visualization isn't just daydreaming, it's a precise technology for programming the subconscious mind. They never discover that their emotional states directly influence their immune system, their learning capacity, and their ability to attract opportunities. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote, "The Game of Life and How to Play It in 1925, outlining practical principles for using mental imagery and emotional alignment to create desired outcomes. These aren't mystical concepts, they're operating instructions for human consciousness. Yet nearly a century later, students still graduate having never encountered these ideas. Meanwhile, they can recite the dates of every major battle in World War I. Neville Goddard spent decades teaching the precise mechanics of imagination, how to construct mental scenes, how to inhabit them emotionally, how to persist until they manifest in physical reality. His techniques are so reliable that they've been quietly adopted by professional athletes, successful entrepreneurs, and high-performance coaches worldwide. But ask any college graduate about disciplined imagination, and you'll get blank stares. The few schools that have integrated consciousness education tell a different story entirely. At the Maharishi School in Iowa, students practice transcendental meditation twice daily alongside regular academics. Their standardized test scores consistently rank in the top percentiles nationally. Their college acceptance rates exceed 95%. More importantly, their graduates report higher levels of life satisfaction, creativity, and emotional resilience than their traditionally educated peers. In Finland, schools that incorporated mindfulness training and emotional intelligence curricula saw dramatic improvements, not just in academic performance, but in student well-being, creativity, and collaborative problem-solving abilities. These students learn to access their inner guidance system rather than constantly seeking external approval. But here's what's really telling. When I researched the decision-makers who shaped modern educational standards, I discovered something fascinating. Many of them sent their own children to private schools that did teach these consciousness principles. The Waldorf schools, attended by children of Silicon Valley executives, emphasize imagination, creativity, and inner development. The elite preparatory academies have always included philosophy, meditation, and what they diplomatically call leadership development, which often includes visualization techniques and mental training. The children of the wealthy learn about the power of their minds. Everyone else learns to follow instructions. You might argue that consciousness studies are too spiritual for public education, but that argument dissolved decades ago. Harvard Medical School teaches meditation to doctors. Stanford Business School includes courses on intuitive decision-making. The military uses visualization training for everything from marksmanship to PTSD recovery. Major corporations hire consultants to teach executives about energy management and mental focus techniques. The science is undeniable. We know that focused attention literally rewires neural pathways. We know that emotional states influence gene expression. We know that group meditation can measurably reduce crime rates in surrounding areas. This has been replicated in multiple studies. We know that people who practice mental rehearsal perform significantly better than those who only practice physically. So why isn't this taught in schools? Because educated consumers of consciousness principles become very difficult to manipulate. When you understand that your thoughts create your reality, you stop accepting limitation as inevitable. When you know how to shift your emotional state consciously, advertising loses much of its power over you. When you've experienced your own ability to manifest desired outcomes, you stop believing you need someone else's permission to succeed. The current system produces graduates who immediately ask, "What should I do with my life?" instead of, "What do I want to create?" They seek jobs instead of recognizing their capacity to generate value directly. They wait for opportunities instead of understanding how to attract them through focused intention and aligned action. Every semester, millions of students memorize information they'll never use while remaining completely ignorant of their own consciousness, the one tool they'll use every moment of their lives. They learn about external forces that shaped history, but never about the internal forces that shape their daily experience. They study dead languages, but never the living language of energy, emotion, and intention that governs their relationships, their health, and their creative capacity. This educational gap isn't maintained through conspiracy, it's maintained through inertia and institutional self-interest. Schools that produce dependent graduates serve the existing economic structure perfectly. Why would a system built on scarcity and competition teach abundance principles and collaborative manifestation? But the dam is breaking. Independent educators worldwide are creating curricula that integrate consciousness science with traditional academics. Parents are supplementing their children's education with books like The Game of Life and practical courses in mental training. Online communities are forming where people share techniques that schools never taught them. The knowledge exists, the science supports it. The only question is whether you'll seek it out yourself or wait for institutions to give you permission to learn about the most powerful force in your life, your own creative consciousness. We've explored how ancient wisdom was systematically suppressed and why modern education deliberately ignores the science of consciousness. Now, I want to share something that will fundamentally change how you understand reality itself. Hidden within the most ancient texts, preserved by secret societies and mystery schools for thousands of years, lie 7 principles that govern absolutely everything in existence. These aren't New Age inventions or modern spiritual fads. The Hermetic principles come from the Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, whose teachings influenced Plato, the Egyptian mystery schools, and every major philosophical tradition. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, his scholars found these principles carved into temple walls that were already ancient when the pyramids were built. The first principle changes everything. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Think about what this actually means. The entire physical universe, every star, planet, atom, and cell in your body, exists within the infinite mind of what the ancients called the All. Your individual consciousness isn't separate from this universal mind. It's a portion of it, like a wave in an infinite ocean. You're not observing reality from the outside. You're participating in its creation from within. This sounds mystical until you examine what quantum physics discovered in the 20th century. The double-slit experiment proved that particles exist in multiple states until consciousness observes them. The act of observation literally creates physical reality. Werner Heisenberg, who won the Nobel Prize for Quantum Mechanics, stated flatly, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." The ancient Hermetic masters knew this thousands of years ago. They understood that consciousness doesn't emerge from matter. Matter emerges from consciousness. Your thoughts aren't just electrical impulses in your brain. They're creative forces shaping the fabric of reality itself. The second principle explains how this works. As above, so below. As below, so above. Look at the structure of an atom. Electrons orbiting a nucleus. Now look at our solar system, planets orbiting the Sunday. The same pattern repeats at every scale of existence. Your personal relationships mirror cosmic laws. The conflicts in your mind reflect the polarities in nature. The rhythms of your daily life echo the cycles of planets and seasons. This isn't coincidence. It's the principle of correspondence revealing that the same laws operate at every level of reality. When you understand the pattern in one area, you can predict how it manifests everywhere else. Master your inner world, and you gain influence over your outer circumstances. The third principle reveals why your thoughts have power. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. Modern science confirms this completely. Every atom vibrates at specific frequencies. Sound, light, heat, electricity, all forms of vibration. Your thoughts create measurable electromagnetic fields around your brain. Different emotional states produce distinct vibrational signatures that sensitive equipment can detect. When you think thoughts of fear, you're literally broadcasting fear frequencies into the quantum field. When you think thoughts of abundance, you're vibrating at abundance frequencies. Like attracts. Like because similar vibrations resonate together. This isn't wishful thinking. It's physics. The fourth principle explains why you can shift from lack to abundance. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Hot and cold aren't separate things. They're different degrees of temperature. Love and hate aren't opposites. They're different intensities of the same emotional energy. Poverty and wealth aren't different realities. They're different positions on the spectrum of abundance. This means you can move from any negative state to its positive pole by gradually shifting your vibrational frequency. You don't need to jump from desperation to prosperity overnight. You can move step by step along the spectrum, each shift making the next one easier. The fifth principle prepares you for the journey. Everything flows, out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. Life moves in rhythms. Expansion follows contraction. Success follows struggle. Joy follows sorrow. When you understand this principle, you stop fighting the natural cycles of existence. During challenging periods, you know the tide will turn. During peak experiences, you prepare for the next cycle rather than clinging desperately to what must naturally change. The sixth principle reveals the true nature of karma. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Nothing in the universe is random. Every thought you think, every action you take, every emotion you feel creates ripples that return to you with mathematical precision. This isn't punishment or reward from some external judge, it's the natural balancing mechanism of reality itself. When you truly grasp this principle, you become incredibly careful about what you put out into the world. You realize that changing your results requires changing your causes, your thoughts, beliefs, and actions. The seventh principle completes the picture. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Not biological gender, but the fundamental forces of creation. The masculine principle is active, focused, penetrating. It plants seeds. The feminine principle is receptive, nurturing, creative. It grows seeds into manifestation. In your own consciousness, you need both. The masculine aspect sets clear intentions and takes focused action. The feminine aspect receives inspiration, trusts the process, and allows creation to unfold. Most people overdevelop one aspect while neglecting the other, creating imbalance in their manifestation abilities. Here's what makes these principles so powerful. They work whether you believe in them or not. Gravity doesn't care about your opinion, neither do the Hermetic principles. They're operating in your life right now, shaping your experiences according to how well you align with them. The ancient masters who preserved this knowledge understood something that modern society has forgotten. You're not a victim of circumstances, you're a co-creator of reality itself. These 7 principles are your tools for conscious creation. When you align your thoughts with the principle of mentalism, your emotions with the principle of vibration, and your actions with the principle of cause and effect, you stop being tossed around by external forces. You become what the Hermetics called a magus, one who creates reality through understanding natural law. This is why these teachings were hidden. Not because they're false, but because they're true. And that truth makes you ungovernable. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This isn't just ancient scripture. It's a fundamental principle of reality that every culture throughout history has recognized in some form. The Hermetic tradition calls it the principle of mentalism. Everything begins as thought, crystallizes through word, and manifests as experience. But here's what fascinates me about our modern world. We've somehow forgotten that words aren't just communication tools, they're creative instruments. Every single word you speak is literally casting a spell on your reality. I'm not being metaphorical here. The word spell comes from the Old English spellion, meaning to tell or speak. When you spell a word, you're arranging letters to create meaning. When you cast a spell, you're arranging words to create reality. Florence Scovel Shinn understood this back in the 1920 seconds when she wrote about how our frequently repeated statements become the blueprints of our experience. She noticed that people who constantly said things like, "I never have money," were unconsciously programming their subconscious minds to reject financial opportunities. Meanwhile, those who asked empowering questions like, "How can I afford this?" were training their brains to seek creative solutions. The neuroscience behind this is absolutely remarkable. When you repeatedly tell yourself, "I can't afford it," you're literally shutting down the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for creative problem solving and opportunity recognition. Dr. Daniel Amen's brain imaging research shows that negative self-talk creates measurable decreases in activity in regions associated with learning, memory, and executive function. Think about the phrases you hear constantly. "Money doesn't grow on trees," "Life is hard," "I'm not good enough," "That's just how things are." These aren't just casual expressions. They're incantations that your subconscious mind accepts as absolute commands. Your brain doesn't argue with these statements. It simply works to make them true in your experience. I've studied thousands of successful people, and there's a consistent pattern in how they use language. Instead of saying, "I can't afford it," they ask, "How can I create the income to afford this?" Instead of, "I don't have time," they say, "How can I prioritize this effectively?" Notice the difference? One closes down possibilities, the other opens up creative pathways. Neville Goddard spent decades teaching about imagination as divine power in action. He understood that when you combine vivid mental imagery with precise present-tense language, you're engaging the same creative mechanism that brings all experiences into being. But there's a crucial distinction between wishful thinking and conscious creation. Wishful thinking says, I hope things get better. Conscious creation says, I am now experiencing, and fills in the specific details. The advertising industry has mastered this science better than anyone. They don't just sell products, they cast linguistic spells that reshape your identity and desires. Just do it isn't selling shoes. It's installing a command in your subconscious. I'm loving it. Programs you to associate positive emotions with fast food. Because you're worth it links self-worth to consumption. Political rhetoric works the same way. Watch how carefully politicians choose their words. They don't talk about spending, they discuss investment. They don't mention problems. They address challenges or opportunities. They understand that language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. But here's where most people go wrong with this knowledge. They think positive thinking means pasting happy affirmations over deep-seated beliefs. That's like putting a band-aid on a broken bone. Real linguistic reprogramming requires you to identify and transform the root patterns that are running your life. Let me give you a practical framework for this. Start by becoming aware of your habitual language patterns. For 1 week, notice every time you use limiting phrases. Don't judge them, just observe. You might be shocked at how often you unconsciously curse your own possibilities. Common reality-limiting spells include I always, followed by something negative. I never, followed by something you want. I can't, without exploring alternatives. That's impossible, which closes down investigation. People like me don't, which reinforces identity limitations. Now here's the transformation process. Instead of fighting these patterns, you're going to consciously reprogram them. When you catch yourself saying, I never have enough money, pause and rephrase. I'm discovering new ways to create abundance. When you hear yourself say, I'm not smart enough, shift to, I'm developing the knowledge I need. The key is making these new patterns feel authentic. Your subconscious mind will reject affirmations that feel completely foreign to your current experience. So you bridge the gap with what I call possibility language. Instead of jumping from I'm broke to I'm rich, you might say I'm learning to recognize opportunities, or money flows to me in unexpected ways. This isn't about denying current circumstances. It's about changing the trajectory of your experience through conscious language choices. Every word you speak is either moving you toward your goals or away from them. There's no neutral ground. The most successful people I know have developed what I call solution-focused language habits. They automatically frame challenges as opportunities, problems as puzzles to solve, and setbacks as feedback for course correction. This isn't naive optimism. It's strategic thinking that keeps their brains focused on possibilities rather than limitations. Start paying attention to your words today. Notice the spells you're casting on your own life. Then consciously choose language that opens doors instead of closing them. Because once you understand that your words are literally shaping your reality, you'll never speak carelessly again. Here's something they absolutely don't want you to understand. The universe operates on a fundamental law of reciprocity that, once mastered, makes their entire scarcity-based control system obsolete. Think about Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This isn't just physics, it's the blueprint for how energy moves through every system in existence. When you breathe out carbon dioxide, plants breathe it in and give you back oxygen. When rivers flow to the ocean, water evaporates and returns as rain to feed those same rivers. The entire natural world runs on this principle of give and receive, flow and return. But here's where it gets interesting. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote extensively about what he called the law of compensation. The idea that every positive action generates an equally positive consequence, often in ways we don't expect. He wasn't talking mysticism. He was observing a practical force that governs human interactions just as precisely as gravity governs falling objects. The Eastern concept of karma points to this same mechanism, though it's been wrapped in so much mystical language that most people miss its practical applications. Karma isn't some cosmic punishment system. It's simply the recognition that what you put into the world creates the conditions for what comes back to you. When you consistently provide value, you create a field of reciprocity around yourself that naturally attracts more resources, opportunities, and support. Now here's where this gets dangerous to existing power structures. Most people have been programmed to believe that pursuing prosperity means fighting over limited resources. They think wealth is finite, so getting more means taking from someone else. This zero-sum mentality keeps everyone competing instead of creating, hoarding instead of circulating. But reciprocity reveals something completely different. When you understand that giving and receiving are part of one continuous flow, as Deepak Chopra explains in his work on abundance, you realize that generosity doesn't deplete you. It actually expands your capacity to receive. The act of giving creates a vacuum that the universe fills, often from directions you never expected. Think about this practically. When you hoard money, relationships, knowledge, or opportunities, you're essentially damming up the flow of energy through your life. That stagnation creates the very scarcity you're trying to avoid. But when you allow resources to flow through you, when you become a conduit rather than a container, you tap into something far more powerful than whatever you could accumulate through hoarding. I've watched this play out countless times. Entrepreneurs who focus obsessively on providing genuine value to their customers often find themselves overwhelmed with business opportunities. Teachers who freely share their knowledge discover that their influence and income grow exponentially. Artists who create from the heart, touching people's lives authentically, build communities of supporters who sustain their work for decades. Compare this to extractive models that take without giving back. Companies that prioritize shareholder profits over customer value eventually face boycotts and competition. Politicians who serve special interests while ignoring constituents get voted out. Individuals who constantly take from relationships without reciprocating find themselves increasingly isolated. The Kabbalistic understanding of reality describes the universe as a dynamic system of exchanges where every act of genuine generosity triggers expansion throughout the entire network. This isn't wishful thinking, it's how energy actually moves through complex systems. Fear-based economic models violate this natural reciprocity and create exactly the dysfunction we see everywhere. When you operate from scarcity mentality, believing there's not enough to go around, you make decisions that actually create scarcity. When you think in zero-sum terms, assuming someone else's gain means your loss, you resist the collaborative approaches that generate abundance for everyone involved. The difference between transactional giving and flow-based giving is crucial here. Transactional giving is essentially a trade. You give something expecting specific returns within a specific time frame. When those exact returns don't materialize, you feel cheated and stop giving. This approach treats reciprocity like a vending machine. Flow-based giving operates differently. You contribute value because you understand that's how energy moves through systems. You trust that reciprocity will occur, but you don't try to control exactly how or when. This allows the universe's intelligence to coordinate returns in ways far more creative and abundant than your limited perspective could orchestrate. But let's address the obvious concerns. What about people who take advantage of generosity? What about maintaining healthy boundaries? These are legitimate questions that deserve practical answers. First, understanding reciprocity doesn't mean becoming a doormat. Natural systems have boundaries, cell membranes, skin, riverbanks. These boundaries don't stop flow, they direct it intelligently. You can be generous while still protecting your energy and resources from people who operate purely in extraction mode. Second, when someone consistently takes without giving back, they're actually cutting themselves off from the reciprocity network. Their behavior creates isolation and scarcity in their own experience. You don't need to punish them. The natural consequences of violating reciprocity do that automatically. The key is learning to discern between people who are temporarily in receiving mode because they're going through difficulties, and people who have made taking without giving back their permanent operating system. The first group will reciprocate when they're able. The second group will drain your resources without ever contributing to the flow. Here's how to start applying this immediately. Begin each day by asking yourself how you can add value to someone else's life. Not for what you'll get back, but because you understand that's how you plug into the universe's abundance mechanism. Notice how this shifts your entire energy and the opportunities that start appearing around you. This is why they don't want you to master reciprocity. Once you understand that generosity creates expansion rather than depletion, you stop participating in their scarcity-based systems. You stop hoarding resources out of fear. You start circulating value, which creates abundance not just for you, but for everyone connected to you. And that's a threat to any system that depends on artificial scarcity to maintain control. The most profound transformation you'll ever experience isn't about gaining something new, it's about letting something die. Not your physical body, but the false versions of yourself that have been running your life from behind the scenes. Carl Jung understood this process intimately. He called it individuation, the integration of unconscious elements into conscious awareness. But what Jung observed in his patients goes far deeper than psychology textbooks reveal. He witnessed people literally dying to who they thought they were and being reborn as who they actually are. The process was so dramatic that many of his case studies read more like spiritual resurrections than therapeutic breakthroughs. Think about the convictions you carry right now. I'm not capable of that. I don't have time. People like me don't succeed. These aren't just thoughts, they're the bars of your mental prison. And here's what's fascinating, you didn't build this prison. It was constructed around you so gradually, so systematically that you learned to call it home. The Hermetic tradition teaches us about the law of polarity, that apparent opposites like lack and abundance exist on the same spectrum. You're not moving from one location to another when you transform. You're shifting your awareness from one pole of the same reality to the other. But this shift requires something to die first, your identification with the lack pole. Let me tell you what needs to die for your rebirth to occur. First, victim consciousness, that deep-seated belief that life happens to you rather than through you. This programming runs so deep that even when you consciously reject it, you'll catch yourself waiting for permission, for the right circumstances, for someone else to change first. Victim consciousness must die completely, not just be managed or minimized. Second, scarcity programming. This isn't just about money, though financial fear is certainly part of it. Scarcity programming convinces you that there's not enough opportunities, not enough love, not enough time, not enough of anything that matters. It keeps you competing instead of creating, hoarding instead of flowing, surviving instead of thriving. Third, external dependency, the addiction to having your worth, your decisions, your very sense of reality validated by others. This dependency is so sophisticated that it disguises itself as humility, as being a team player, as caring what others think. But it's actually a form of spiritual slavery that keeps you perpetually looking outside yourself for what can only be found within. Fourth, fear-based decision-making. Every choice filtered through, what if it doesn't work, instead of, what if it does? Every opportunity evaluated through the lens of what you might lose rather than what you might gain. This pattern doesn't just limit your actions, it rewires your brain to perceive threat where opportunity exists. Finally, identification with past failures. Your history is not your identity, but the false self clings to past disappointments as evidence of future limitations. This identification must die for your true capabilities to emerge. Now here's where it gets interesting and difficult. Your ego will fight this death with everything it has, even though these patterns create suffering. Why? Because the ego equates change with annihilation. It would rather maintain familiar misery than risk unknown transformation. I've watched people sabotage themselves right at the moment of breakthrough. They'll create drama, pick fights, make impulsive decisions that reinforce their old patterns. This isn't weakness. It's the death throes of false identity. The ego's final desperate attempt to maintain control. The mystery schools understood this resistance. Egyptian initiates underwent ritual death and rebirth in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. Greek mystery schools at Eleusis guided participants through symbolic journeys into the underworld and back. Shamanic traditions worldwide include vision quests, where the seeker must face the death of their ordinary consciousness to receive their true power. These weren't metaphors or theatrical performances. They were precisely designed psychological technologies for facilitating the death of false identity and the birth of authentic self. Modern therapeutic approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy and trauma healing work with the same principle. Old patterns must be consciously died to before new ones can take root. Life often forces this symbolic death through crisis, job loss, relationship endings, health challenges, financial collapse. These aren't punishments. They're invitations to let die what was never truly serving you anyway. But you don't have to wait for life to force transformation. You can choose it consciously. Start by identifying one core limiting belief that's ready to die. Write it down, look at it, thank it for trying to protect you. Then consciously choose to let it go. The fear of losing identity is the biggest obstacle most people face. If I'm not the struggling artist, the overwhelmed parent, the person who never gets a break, who am I? This fear keeps people clinging to identities that create suffering because at least they're familiar. But here's what actually happens. Your true self emerges more clearly after the false identities die. Not a manufactured or imposed self, but the authentic you that existed before the programming began. The you that knows what you want, trusts your capabilities, and moves through the world with natural confidence. The integration phase is where transformation becomes lived reality rather than just peak experience. This is where the Hermetic principle of as above, so below comes into play. The inner death and rebirth must be reflected in your outer world through new choices, new relationships, new ways of being. Integration means catching yourself when old patterns resurface, and they will, and consciously choosing the new response. It means surrounding yourself with people who reflect your emerging identity rather than your dying one. It means taking actions that align with who you're becoming, not who you used to be. The most beautiful part of this process is that once you've died to one false identity, you develop immunity to future ones. You recognize the signs earlier. You resist the programming more effectively. You become someone who transforms consciously rather than waiting for life to force change upon you. Your rebirth isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process of shedding what no longer serves and embodying what does. Each symbolic death makes you more alive, more authentic, more powerful in your ability to co-create reality. Here's what Napoleon Hill discovered that completely changed how I understand wealth, and it's going to shift everything for you too. Hill spent decades studying the most successful people of his era, and he found something fascinating. The people who accumulated the most money weren't necessarily the ones who chased money the hardest. Instead, they were the ones who had what he called a definite major purpose, something bigger than themselves that they pursued with unwavering faith and persistence. But here's where it gets interesting. Hill noticed that when people aligned with this deeper purpose, synchronicities started happening. Opportunities appeared. The right people showed up at the right time. Resources flowed toward them almost magnetically. He was witnessing something that Ernest Holmes would later articulate in his Science of Mind teachings. Our physical reality emerges from our thoughts, but not just any thoughts. Thoughts that resonate with universal principles. This is the difference between wealth and prosperity, and understanding this distinction will change how you approach everything. Wealth is having money. Prosperity is flowing with abundance in all areas of life. You can be wealthy and miserable, but you cannot be truly prosperous without a sense of alignment and purpose that extends beyond your bank account. I've watched this play out countless times. There's the tech entrepreneur who built a billion-dollar company but felt completely empty inside because his success was driven purely by ego, the need for status, security, and control. Then there's the teacher I know who makes $45,000 a year but radiates abundance because she's aligned with her purpose of nurturing young minds. Guess which one sleeps better at night? Consumer culture has programmed us backwards. We've been taught to seek fulfillment through acquisition rather than contribution. We chase the next purchase, the bigger house, the luxury car, thinking these things will fill the void inside us. But acquisition without purpose is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it never stays full. The ancient mystery schools understood something we've forgotten. In their esoteric rituals, giving resources away was considered a sacred act that sanctified abundance. When you give, you're not losing something. You're participating in the flow of universal energy. You're transforming the act of receiving into an opportunity to serve. This isn't just spiritual philosophy, it's practical psychology. When you operate from abundance rather than scarcity, you make different decisions, take different risks, and attract different opportunities. Think about the most successful people you know personally, not the celebrities or billionaires you read about, but the people in your actual life who seem to have it figured out. I'll bet they're not the ones constantly worried about money. They're usually the ones focused on solving problems, creating value, building relationships, or developing their talents. Money follows value, and value comes from alignment with purpose. Holmes taught that when we align our individual will with universal will, we tap into infinite creative power. But what does this look like practically? It means asking different questions. Instead of, how can I make more money, you ask, how can I serve more effectively? Instead of, what can I get, you ask, what can I give? This isn't naive idealism, it's sophisticated strategy. I know what you're thinking. That's easy to say when you're not worried about paying rent. Fair point. Let me be clear, purpose-driven living doesn't mean ignoring practical concerns about money and survival. It means approaching these concerns from a different angle. When you're aligned with purpose, you're not just trading time for money in some soul-crushing job. You're developing skills, building relationships, and creating value in ways that compound over time. Here's what I've observed. People who neglect higher purpose often get trapped in frantic quests for material gain that ultimately create more imbalance. They ignore the fundamental interdependence between individual and collective well-being. They think they can succeed while everyone around them struggles, but isolation breeds anxiety, not abundance. True prosperity recognizes that your well-being is connected to the well-being of your community. The difference between ego-driven accumulation and soul-driven prosperity shows up in your daily decisions. Ego asks, what's in it for me? Soul asks, what wants to emerge through me? Ego hoards resources out of fear. Soul circulates resources out of trust. Ego measures success by what you own. Soul measures success by what you've contributed. I've studied people who achieved conventional success but felt empty inside. Usually, they climbed someone else's ladder. They pursued goals that looked impressive from the outside but didn't resonate with their authentic nature. Success without alignment is just elaborate suffering. It's like winning a game you never wanted to play. Contrast this with people who found prosperity through purpose alignment. They might not have the biggest houses or fanciest cars, but they have something more valuable: coherence between their values and their actions. They wake up energized because their work feels meaningful. They sleep peacefully because they're contributing to something larger than themselves. Gratitude plays a crucial role in maintaining prosperous flow. When you're grateful for what you have, you're acknowledging abundance that already exists. This isn't about positive thinking or manifestation tricks. It's about accurate perception. Most of us are surrounded by abundance, but trained to focus on scarcity. Gratitude recalibrates your attention. Stewardship is another key element. When you see yourself as a steward rather than an owner of resources, you make different choices. Stewards think long-term. They consider impact on future generations. They understand that abundance shared is abundance multiplied. The circulation principle is fundamental to prosperity. Money, like blood, needs to flow to remain healthy. Hoarding creates stagnation. Giving creates circulation. This doesn't mean being careless with resources. It means being strategic about how you participate in the flow of value exchange. Purpose-driven people often achieve greater material success precisely because they provide genuine value to others. When you're solving real problems or fulfilling authentic needs, people naturally want to support your work. Success becomes a byproduct of service rather than the primary goal. The shift from material accumulation to purpose alignment isn't just about feeling better, it's about accessing a completely different level of creative power. When you're aligned with universal principles, you're not fighting against the current anymore. You're flowing with forces much larger than your individual will. This is true prosperity, not having everything but being in right relationship with everything you have. It's developing your talents fully, building meaningful relationships, creating beauty in the world, solving important problems, and serving others in ways that honor your unique gifts. Money becomes a tool for greater service rather than an end in itself. When Eckhart Tolle wrote about fear being either a projection into an imagined future or emotional residue from the past, he identified something profound. Fear disconnects us from the present moment, which is the only place where creative power actually exists. This isn't just spiritual philosophy, it's the most practical insight you can understand about why your co-creative abilities remain dormant. Fear operates as the ultimate creative block because it fundamentally alters your relationship with possibility. When you're afraid, you're not engaging with what could be. You're defending against what might go wrong. That defensive posture shuts down the very neural pathways that generate innovative solutions and bold action. I've watched this play out financially in countless lives. Someone dreams of starting their own business but remains paralyzed by insecurity, choosing the familiar discomfort of a job they hate over the unknown territory of entrepreneurship. They'll rationalize this as being practical or responsible, but what's really happening is that fear has convinced them that their current lack is safer than potential abundance. This is exactly why limiting access to spiritual knowledge serves existing power structures so effectively. When people don't understand their creative capabilities, they resign themselves to circumstances that could be transformed. Fear becomes the enforcement mechanism that keeps this resignation in place without any external coercion needed. Let's examine the specific fears that block prosperity, because they're more varied and sophisticated than most people realize. Fear of failure is obvious. Nobody wants to lose money or look foolish. But fear of success is equally paralyzing and far more insidious. Success brings visibility, responsibility, and the expectation that you'll maintain or exceed your achievements. Many people unconsciously sabotage themselves right before breakthrough moments because success feels more threatening than familiar struggle. Then there's fear of judgment, which keeps people playing small to avoid criticism. I've seen individuals with brilliant ideas never pursue them because they're terrified of what family members or former colleagues might say. Fear of responsibility stops people from claiming their power because power requires making decisions and living with consequences. Fear of change keeps them in situations they've outgrown because the unknown feels more dangerous than known misery. Joseph Campbell understood this when he mapped the hero's journey. The hero must enter the abyss, that terrifying space of the unknown, and confront whatever lives there. Only by facing what they most fear can they access the power that was always available but hidden behind that fear. This isn't metaphorical, it's describing a real psychological process that every person must navigate to access their creative potential. Practically speaking, someone who never faces their fear of failure remains stuck in self-sabotaging patterns. They'll procrastinate on important projects, avoid networking opportunities, or quit just before achieving results. Someone who never confronts their fear of success will unconsciously create problems right when things start going well, relationship drama, health issues, or financial emergencies that derail their progress. Fear creates self-fulfilling prophecies with mathematical precision. People afraid of rejection avoid situations where they might be rejected, which guarantees they'll never receive the opportunities that come through putting themselves out there. People afraid of failure don't try new approaches, ensuring they remain stuck with strategies that aren't working. People afraid of success unconsciously sabotage their achievements, proving to themselves that they weren't meant for greater things. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating. When fear activates your amygdala, it literally hijacks your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for creative thinking, long-term planning, and rational decision-making. You shift into survival mode, where the only options your brain can perceive are fight, flight, or freeze. None of these states are conducive to the relaxed awareness necessary for co-creating reality. This is why people make their worst financial decisions when they're afraid. They panic sell investments during market downturns, take jobs they're overqualified for because they're desperate, or avoid investing altogether because they're terrified of loss. Fear narrows perception so dramatically that opportunities become invisible even when they're right in front of you. Cultural and familial programming installs specific fears with surgical precision. Money is the root of all evil teaches you to fear wealth itself. Don't get too big for your britches installs fear of standing out or claiming your worth. Play it safe programs fear of risk-taking, which is essential for any meaningful change. You can't trust anyone creates fear of collaboration and partnership, isolating you from the relationships that could accelerate your growth. These aren't just sayings, they're hypnotic suggestions implanted during your most impressionable years. They create what psychologists call approach avoidance conflicts. You simultaneously want and fear the same things. You want financial freedom but fear the responsibility that comes with money. You want recognition but fear the visibility that success brings. The spiritual practices we discussed in earlier sections, meditation, prayer, positive affirmations, work specifically because they dissolve fear and raise your mental frequency above survival mode. When you're in a state of inner peace and expanded awareness, creative solutions emerge naturally. Problems that seemed insurmountable from a fear-based perspective reveal obvious pathways forward. But you need practical techniques for transforming fear when it arises. Gradual exposure works by slowly expanding your comfort zone rather than forcing dramatic leaps that trigger overwhelming anxiety. If you're afraid of public speaking, start by speaking up more in small group conversations before attempting keynote presentations. Reframing transforms fear by changing its meaning. Instead of viewing nervousness before an important meeting as evidence that something's wrong, recognize it as excitement and energy that can fuel peak performance. Your body's arousal is identical whether you interpret it as fear or excitement. The difference is purely mental. Breathwork directly interrupts the fear response by activating your parasympathetic nervous system. When you're afraid, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid. Consciously slowing and deepening your breath signals to your brain that you're safe, allowing rational thinking to return. Visualization lets you rehearse success scenarios so thoroughly that they feel familiar rather than foreign. When you've mentally experienced positive outcomes dozens of times, your nervous system doesn't interpret new opportunities as threats to be avoided. Energy clearing techniques, whether through meditation, prayer, or other spiritual practices, address fear at its root by dissolving the energetic patterns that maintain fearful thoughts and emotions. Here's what I want you to understand. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and taking aligned action anyway. Every person who has ever created meaningful change in their life or the world has had to develop this capacity. The fear doesn't disappear. You develop a different relationship with it. Fear will tell you that you're not ready, not qualified, not deserving, or that the timing isn't right. But here's the truth. You'll never feel completely ready for your next level of growth. The readiness emerges through the action itself, not before it. Your fears are not protecting you from danger. They're protecting you from your own power. And that power is exactly what you need to co-create the reality you actually want to live in. Understanding these principles intellectually is just the beginning, like studying the theory of swimming while standing at the pool's edge. Real transformation requires diving in, and that means consistent practice and daily application of what we've explored together. The gap between knowledge and embodiment is where most people get stuck, reading book after book about consciousness while their external reality remains unchanged. The transition from passive observer to active co-creator starts with honest self-examination. Look at your life right now and ask, do you speak words that seed the futures you want? When you're frustrated, do you vocalize complaints that reinforce limitation, or do you redirect your language toward possibility? Most people unconsciously narrate their problems into permanence, describing their financial struggles, relationship challenges, or health issues in ways that crystallize these experiences deeper into their reality. Consider how you relate to abundance and flow. Do you value generosity and free circulation over accumulation and hoarding? This isn't about giving away money you don't have. It's about recognizing that energy, attention, and resources are meant to move. When you hoard compliments, withhold appreciation, or clutch tightly to opportunities without sharing them, you create energetic constipation that blocks new abundance from entering your experience. The most challenging question is whether you're prepared to release old patterns and be reborn into broader awareness where prosperity and self-realization walk hand in hand. This requires letting go of familiar victim stories, comfortable complaints, and the identity you've built around your limitations. Many people say they want transformation, but unconsciously resist it because their problems have become their personality. Becoming a conscious co-creator involves 5 fundamental practices that must become as automatic as breathing. First is daily thought monitoring, not obsessing over every mental movement, but developing awareness of your dominant thought patterns. You're looking for repetitive loops, especially the subtle ones that run in the background like mental elevator music. These unconscious repetitions are programming your subconscious and consequently your reality. Second is intentional language use. Your words are creative commands to the universe, yet most people speak carelessly, saying, "I can't afford it," when they mean, "I choose not to purchase this," or "I'm so tired," when they could say, "I'm ready to rest and recharge." This isn't about positive thinking, it's about precision. Your subconscious mind and the universal field respond to what you actually say, not what you mean to say. Third is establishing regular spiritual practice that connects you to the source of creative power. This might be meditation, prayer, time in nature or conscious breathing, whatever consistently shifts you from ego identification to expanded awareness. The specific technique matters less than the consistency. 5 minutes daily beats 2 hours weekly, because you're training your nervous system to access these states reliably. Fourth is taking purposeful action aligned with your intentions. The universe responds to movement, not just visualization. If you're calling in a new career, you must also update your skills, network authentically, and take concrete steps toward your vision. Co-creation requires both inner alignment and outer expression. Fifth is service to others, using your growing awareness to contribute to collective well-being. This isn't charity from a place of superiority, but recognizing that your individual awakening is meaningless unless it serves the whole. As you develop your creative abilities, you become responsible for uplifting others rather than manipulating circumstances for purely personal gain. This responsibility is crucial because conscious creators must consider the impact of their thoughts and actions on the collective field. When you truly understand that consciousness is interconnected, you realize that every thought ripples outward, every emotion contributes to the planetary atmosphere, and every action influences the whole. You can't use these principles just to get what you want while ignoring how your desires affect others. Living consciously in an unconscious world presents unique challenges. You'll face skepticism from people who are threatened by your growth because it mirrors their own stagnation. Family members might try to pull you back into old patterns through guilt or criticism. Friends may distance themselves as your interests and conversations evolve beyond gossip and complaint sessions. Maintaining your practice during difficult times tests your commitment to these principles. When external circumstances feel chaotic, when money is tight, or when relationships are strained, it's tempting to abandon conscious creation and return to reactive patterns. These are precisely the moments when your practice matters most, when you prove to yourself and the universe that your commitment to conscious living is genuine. Staying aligned with higher purpose amid material pressures requires constant recalibration. The dominant culture will try to seduce you back into unconscious consumption, competitive thinking, and fear-based decision-making. You must develop discernment about which influences you allow into your mental and emotional space. The democratization of spiritual knowledge creates both tremendous opportunities and significant risks. When these teachings escape from selected circles and reach millions of people simultaneously, the effects can be profound. We're witnessing unprecedented numbers of individuals awakening to their creative power, questioning limiting beliefs, and taking responsibility for their experience. However, this widespread access also leads to distortions and unrealistic expectations. Some people approach these principles like a cosmic vending machine, expecting instant manifestation without inner development. Others use spiritual concepts to bypass personal responsibility or justify selfish behavior. The challenge is applying these teachings with moral awareness, genuine practice, and proper discernment. Individual awakening creates ripples that contribute to collective transformation. As more people claim their creative power and take responsibility for their experience, the entire field of consciousness shifts. We're moving from scarcity-based systems built on competition and hoarding toward abundance-based cooperation that recognizes our fundamental interconnection. Here are specific daily practices you can implement immediately. Begin each morning by setting clear intentions for how you want to show up in the world. End each evening by reflecting on your thoughts, words, and actions, celebrating alignments and noting areas for growth. Practice conscious breathing throughout the day, especially during stressful moments, to maintain connection to your centered awareness. Develop a gratitude practice that goes beyond listing things you appreciate to actually feeling the emotion of appreciation in your body. Engage in regular service activities that contribute to others' well-being without expecting recognition or reward. These practices aren't about perfection, but about consistent alignment with higher principles. This journey of conscious co-creation is both deeply personal and collectively significant. Every person who awakens to their creative power and uses it responsibly helps tip the balance toward a more enlightened humanity. You're not just changing your own life, you're participating in the evolution of human consciousness itself. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."